Cloud9 are back-to-back champions. Another victory, the fourth in a row for Blabber. Berserker popping off. Pretty much everyone looking good on Cloud9. The outcome we expected, not maybe in the way we expected it. And then we also need to talk about FlyQuest this week. Big time downfall. J&T and I will get into why. Some I will dominate controversy. He put out a hot take on Twitter. J&T and I will give our takes in episode 121 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. Jinter, let's start with the weekend, the final series, Cloud9 and Golden Guardians, by the way. Not what we were expecting, but probably the best opponent that was left.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the last two games is what's still in everybody's minds, but we go back to the start of the series, and it felt like Golden Guardians were actually the ones who were getting Cloud9 on the back foot very early. The early game being the strong point of Cloud9, and the expectation going into the series was that Cloud9 was just going to plow through Golden Guardians, especially in that early game. And the fact that Golden Guardians was ahead in almost every single early game, right? I guess not every single, but in games 1, 2, and 4, had early game gold leads, definitely unexpected.
Games 1, 2, and 3, I think you mean, because game 4, Cloud9 just ran them
Oh,
over.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So I made sure to ask J&T, guys. I made sure to ask them after the first two games. It was 1-1, and I said, "Are you still confident?" Because the whole time it was just Cloud9 3-0, Cloud9 3-0, and then after they lost the game, I made sure to ask J&T, "Is it still Cloud9 3-1?" And he was confident still, I can say. But J&T, I got to ask, like, come on, there's no way you were as confident. Like, you could still be confident in the 3-1, but there's no way you were as confident after the series was 1-1 than you were going into the series, right?
Yeah, I definitely maybe wasn't as confident, but like you said, I was still pretty confident that Cloud9 was going to be able to close it out. And the switch from after game two to the beginning of game three, where they basically they didn't necessarily do like a 180 in their strategy, but the way that they were playing games out was the complete opposite to what they were doing in the first two games. Sort of, the first two games was pretty akin to what they'd done against FlyQuest, where they just wanted to pick this early Maokai, pick strong laning champions, and let those, presumably early lane leads facilitate the rest of the game. And Golden Guardians was really going blow for blow in those first two games and not letting Cloud9 generate an early game gold lead, because the way that the team likes to function is use their early game advantage to get easy objective control, and the opponents usually can't contest you. But since Golden Guardians was going blow for blow, anytime that they would contest or there was a big team fight objective fight, it was even footing. In the majority of cases, Cloud9 is up 2, 3, 4,000 gold at these points into the game. Golden Guardians is sometimes even ahead, and they were doing a lot of good work in team fights.
I think that's why the feeling of the series felt so off after the first two games is because of just how good Golden Guardians early game looked. Whereas we've been talking all split long that Cloud9 is the early game team, and then you suddenly see them go back to back games where they're losing the early game, pretty convincing, by the way, like significant losses in the early game. That's where me personally, I was not as confident in the 3-1 Cloud9 anymore. I still, like, I'll admit, I still thought Cloud9 was going to win, but it wasn't so obvious anymore. And honestly, that's more than we could have asked for out of this weekend, because we said coming in, like, easy Cloud9 win. And yes, of course, they still got the victory, but like, we thought C9 was just going to roll over 3-0, and this was going to be one of the least exciting finals ever, but definitely competitive for sure. And I guess to start talking about individual performances, I guess we should start where C9 didn't look so good early on in those first couple of games. I think we can probably acknowledge that M&S looked a little bit shaky. Oriana game one, he was losing hard to Licorice. What was the game two? Game two, he was
It was on the
uh,
Akali.
the Akali. The Akali was not a good. He did not have a good performance on the Akali either. All the team fights he was missing is Akali E. He was missing the ulties. He was just useless, falling really far behind in lane. And so you were kind of worried, or at least I was at that point. Like, this isn't the M&S that was kind of promised, And we've seen lots of ups and downs from an M&S, and we thought maybe this was a day that we were just going to see downs.
And even the other place that Golden Guardians seemed convincingly better in those first two games was in the support position, because you really saw Golden Guardians actually take control of the bot lane, where for the most part, Cloud9, I mean, the expectation is that they're winning all their lanes, but bot lane especially is one of the lanes where Cloud9 like to put a lot of focus into, and ensuring that that is an ahead lane, which allows them to play around early dragons and whatnot. But it was Golden Guardians who was getting the advantage in the bot lane early. You saw that first game solo kill at level 1. You know, Sven making just a pretty big mistake, walking up into basically melee range of the Golden Guardians bot lane. Golden Guardians doing equally good as a job to get away from the Flay to then re-engage back onto Sven, but Hui also definitely was a standout for Golden Guardians in terms of taking the fight to Cloud9.
And that's where, when we see Golden Guardians at their best, sure, mid jungle's looking good too, but who he is really, really solid in not only just laning phase, but engages altogether. And since we had started to see that version of who he for most of playoffs, it was reasonable that even after we saw it in games 1 and 2 from Golden Guardians, it was reasonable to think that we were going to see the top level Huhi this weekend, and maybe he was going to completely take over the series, although C9 did put a stop to that in game 3 and 4.
Yeah, and then kind of what I mentioned, just earlier about Cloud9's sort of switch in dynamic from the first two games to the second two games was kind of saw that right from Blabber, who we talked about in the past being the motor for Cloud9 and just getting the snowball rolling. And we saw from the first two Maokai games, then swapping over to the Elise in game 3. And like you said, what was it? Game 3. Actually, Game of Legends doesn't have it posted, but game 3 with the solo kill that Eminence got at level 1 and then the top lane dive that they pulled off at level 4, you could really like that was the shiny like Cloud9 that we were seeing in the regular season that was just completely dumpstering teams through early game domination.
And more on Blabber to me was game 4. Like, game 4 wasn't really close, but I think a big part of it was every time Golden Guardians tried to force a fight or an objective or whatever to try to claw back in, Blabber's Poppy hit the R button and never missed. Like, every time you were like, Golden Guardians going to contest here, and then he would ulti one or two people away, and it was just like, nope, Cloud9's objective. And like, it really felt so helpless for Golden Guardians. That to me was, I guess I would say game 3 is where it really started to turn in Cloud9's favor, but game 4 it was clear that like it was just, that's when our expectations coming into the series came to fruition, was like it just wasn't close. No matter what Golden Guardians tried to do, C9 just didn't let them. And I think the game 4, which was the most dominant one, was in big part due to Blabber just hitting every Poppy R that he needed to hit.
Yeah, we kind of saw throughout the LCS regular season and into playoffs how just sort of objective focused the game has become. It has been that for quite a while now, but you can really see the importance of these first Dragon and Rift Herald fights because they can often lead to a 2 to 3,000 gold, early game. In every single game this series, once one team was really able to take control over the other, you really saw that snowball effect. With game one, games 1 and game 2 with Golden Guardians in the early game, you saw in game 3 while it was, Golden Guardians favored, once Cloud9 got that first fight that pretty much started off with Berserker solo killing Stixxay in the mid lane, calling
Yep.
him down, you saw really Cloud9, the gold swung about 5,000 gold within like 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I looked at it, and Golden Guardians was up 1.5 K around 15 minutes, sometime around then, and then the game was over by 26 minutes. So 1.5 K at 15 in favor of Golden Guardians, and then in 10 minutes the game completely shifted the other way and was over for Cloud9. And you mentioned that Berserker with the culling play just erasing Stixxay was the kind of thing that got C9 going. That to me is absolutely where the series swung. Um, After that play, Golden Guardians didn't make anything happen the rest of the series. And so it is crazy that you can have such a competitive game 1 and 2, and then one play, just one solo kill, and then they were just deflated. There was no more, there was nothing left out of Golden Guardians. And I guess to talk a little bit more about Berserker, game 1, we have to talk about the throw. Like, look, Berserker popping off on the Aphelios for sure, and I don't think we can ignore the other side of it, where like that's Golden Guardians' game to win. And it should have been a 2-0 series after 2 games, right? But because of that game 1 throw, that's like, I guess that's kind of where, like, Golden Guardians had their chance to make this, to steal this series. And when you lose that game 1, it's just not, it's not in the cards anymore.
And even going into game 2, it kind of felt like the old habits were haunting Golden Guardians because one of the problems that they've had for many years now, kind of with not this whole roster, but with the core of the roster, has been closing out those early game leads. And game 1 was like flashbacks to last year's summer Golden Guardians where they just couldn't close out a game, couldn't close out a lead. And even in game 2, we're both sitting there talking like, is Golden Guardians going to somehow lose this game? Like,
Yeah.
is it throwable this time? But despite finishing out the game 2, it did feel like they kind of ran out of juice come game 3 and 4.
After they threw game 1 with a 9,000 gold lead, I was saying, like, I am not, like, calling any game over until there's 5 people hitting the Nexus. Like, there's no way I'm accepting that Golden Guardians is just going to win after you throw that hard. Because it's not just like, "Oh, Golden Guardians can't close out a game," lol. That to me, it gave off the vibes of, like, nerves, honestly.
Definitely.
When you're that far ahead and you have, who was it? It was I think it was it Licorice that was on Malphite in game 1? They full engaged
He was on Kennen.
on oh, that's what it was. He did the Kennen ulti onto Fudge, who was on Olaf, which, like, he'll just run out of it, and onto Orianna when it was so clear that Berserker was the one that you needed to pick. And yeah, I mean, I guess we have to come back down to earth when it comes to Licorice stuff, because Licorice, while I will say looked so much better in playoffs, I don't want to take that away from him. This series, to me, everything after laning phase, he was just hard gapped. Honestly, uh, there was the game where he wasted flash in the 1v1 against the Orianna bot lane. We saw that that was instantly punished later on, whereas they easily win a team fight if he has flash, and of course he didn't have it. There was the other game where I think it was another Kennen one when he walked up to the Renekton. Like, he was winning that lane, by the way. Licorice was hard stomping against the Renekton in lane, and then out of lane, Fudge just continued to kill him over and over again. Licorice couldn't side lane without dying, and it was kind of back to what we used to see out of Licorice. But again, I don't want to take away, like, from the rest of playoffs, because Licorice had a resurgence for sure. It's just, unfortunately, he went up against the best top laner in the league and got kind of hard destroyed everything post laning phase.
Yeah, Fudge definitely showed why he is the best top laner in the league. And while Licorice has been surging during the playoffs, Fudge seemed to be the guy to put an end to his streak in terms of his top notch performances. Licorice, like you said, did have some good moments in this series, specifically in the lane phase, which is good to see because in the past, um, even when Licorice has been losing, sometimes he's been losing, really hard, or losing laning phases when he has the counter matchup. So to see him still playing well within lane when he has the advantageous matchup is good. Not enough to ultimately get past Cloud9 this time around.
Yeah. And you know what I really I hate to admit, but I have to admit, is like, we saw it coming. Like, we even said before the game, like, I think Licorice is going to get exposed. And that sounds like that. I know it sounds like we're cheering against Licorice. It's not that, guys. It's just that is the serious gap between Fudge and Licorice. And I think the biggest reason why we know that that was going to happen is because we've seen Licorice get counter picks like that. That's been his thing this playoffs, whereas it hasn't been for most of the year. But Fudge is not going to let you just take over with counter picks. Like, it just doesn't work that way. Yeah. So that's kind of the way it went, sadly.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other, players to really talk about it. I guess, you know, I kind of talked about it a little bit already, but Blabber kind of back to the spring Blabber who just dominates everybody in the early game with sort of the game 3 and 4 performance. And, he was a pretty big storyline that they were talking about after the series finished in terms of his placement on, like, is he one of the best LCS junglers of all time? Is he the best? He doesn't necessarily have the titles to match Xmithy, but in terms of his individual skill, he definitely is at the top. So a pretty interesting question to see where he fits into the whole GOAT conversation potentially. He's at 4
Well,
now, and
so
what?
I actually want to. I want to get to that just a sec. I guess the last thing that I want to say is I do think River actually put so much more respect on
Oh
his
yeah,
name as well. Like, River
100%.
had a fantastic series, whereas, like, we saw River shine. Like, he was very. I mean, let's be honest. It was Golden Guardians that was hit or miss this split, and River was no different. Gory was no different. I think this series was really where we started to see River actually start to take over games completely. The guy's Wukong is really good. As Jarvan is insane. Like, yeah, I don't know. River had a really good weekend, and so there's that. I do want to get back to. Sorry, did you have anything that you wanted to add to the River Gory stuff?
No, but good to shout him out because River definitely. I don't know. I guess in my opinion, I thought he was not playing very well towards the beginning of the split. Even when Golden Guardians was streaking, I thought a lot of that was mainly due with Gory in the bot lane, and I wasn't necessarily singing River's praises as much as everybody else, despite liking the guy because he's really good. But this weekend and even in the playoffs showed how strong he really is, and him and Gory are definitely a pretty strong mid duo.
I guess the last thing on that on the river thing that I'll say that I think we've reminded people before, but I'm going to remind again. This was a trade at the end of last year, and like at the time it looked so bad, right? He went from Dignitas over to Golden Guardians, ran it down so hard, clearly lacked synergy with his teammates. A fresh start, new season, goes in with new teammates, has time to actually gel with them, and by the end of the season, looks like one of the best junglers we have in the league. So I just got a shout out. I believe it was Danon who was the GM at the time for that trade, looking really, really valuable now. And of course, they're going to MSI because of it. Uh,
Yeah.
Now we were talking about Blabber possibly being the greatest jungler of all time, and on the broadcast today, they brought up who is the best C9 roster of all time. So, like, out of all the Cloud9 players, where would you put? Um, who would you put top jungle, mid, AD, and support? And I think that's an interesting conversation for us to have, J&T. I guess, do you want to just go full rosters of who we got for each, or do you want to start off with and go role by role? How do we want to do this?
I mean, I we can go roster by we can do the full roster. I feel like we're gonna have the same roster, unfortunately, but I think we can both agree that it's probably the best roster.
I don't know. I mean, okay, well let's just go ahead. Okay, I'll start. I'm gonna say Impact, Blabber, Jensen, Sneaky, Vulcan.
Okay, see, I have Berserker over Sneaky, and
Okay, go ahead.
despite, I mean, I guess I would say, despite Berserker only being in the league for a year and a half now,
Hmm.
I feel like it's pretty obvious to say that he has probably the highest ceiling of any AD carry player that we've ever seen in the LCS. And I would say his individual skills are easily probably up there with other top ADCs like at their peak all time. Like you think of like peak double lift in, 2016, 2017, it feels like Berserker is on or even above that level individually. And you compare it to the Cloud9 80 carries and the only other option is Sneaky really. And I can't ignore how hard Berserker is probably ahead of him.
Yeah,
Individually, that is.
yeah. See, I just don't think that's necessarily the case, and the reason why it's not anything against Berserker. I think people are really forgetting just how good Sneaky was in the early days of the LCS. Now, look, I hear me out here before you meme on me. Sneaky was like hard rank 1 NA at the time, hard carry for Cloud9 back in the day. And I know people are going to be like rank 1 XD. You don't people need to understand back in season 4, rank 1 was a big deal. That was when grinding solo queue was absolutely like everyone was doing it. All the pros were nonstop day and night playing hard grinding solo queue. Now that doesn't mean just because he was great in solo queue that means he was the best player Cloud9 ever had to put on the Rift. No, it doesn't. But it does say just how far above he was everyone else at that time. And I know everyone else is going to point to Doublelift. I don't think Doublelift really peaked until we saw him with TSM and then TL. I think that at that time, Sneaky was the best AD. And I think it was later on that people started to realize, like, hey, don't forget about Doublelift. And so to me, even though Berserker, absolute monster, there's no doubt there, probably the best AD in the league, although it's probably difficult, maybe him or Prince. I think people are really forgetting that at that time, Sneaky was just such an absolute monster. And I think it's easy to forget because that was nearly a decade ago. And so, yeah, I will not be surprised at all with people being like, no, it's not Sneaky, it's Berserker. But I think if you have that opinion, please remember, or if you didn't watch, I understand. But if you have watched, please remember just how good Sneaky was back then.
Mhm. And it's a completely fair argument because it's always difficult to compare players in the current age of league versus the early days. Seasons one,
Of
two, three, four,
course.
five. The game is completely different. What it means to be a good player is completely different. The definition of a top player or a great player or a franchise player, a star player, it's completely different now than what it was before. And funny enough, like the whole OG Cloud9 roster is difficult to put in the picture because you have players like Lemonation, Balls even, who at the time when they were playing, they were top players in their roles for almost, 2 years, but they didn't necessarily have that same longevity like a player, like Sneaky, Impact, High even to a certain extent. So I think for me, those kind of the only OG that I really ever considered was Sneaky, but Berserker, I mean, maybe I'm just fanboying a bit, but that guy's just insane, man.
I mean, I think we all agree with that, right? Like, to me, I had no problem when I saw people, because some of the analysts said Berserker. I had no problem with that. I saw some of them say Fudge. No problem with that either. Fudge is an absolute monster. Also, I did have a problem when I saw other people that weren't Jensen. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh come on, man.
Jensen's the
There,
clear cut number one. It's not
there was
close.
high. So I think it was Dash had high, and then oh, Raz had M&S, and I'm like, dude,
You can't do
come
that.
on.
You can't do that.
Now here's the thing. So I do want to give a little bit of slack, because if they just pull up the broadcast and everyone votes the same, like what's the point of even doing it? You know what I mean? So if that's the reason why Raz was like, I'm trying to be a little bit different. We even saw in his prediction for today, he predicted Golden Guardians 3-2 in the series. So if he's just trying to spice it up by, having more representation in the voting, fine. I get it. It's an entertainment product. It's a broadcast. You want to like highlight different players, but if this was like something that was really serious and like you were actually like try harding of like who's the best player in that role, if you're not putting Jensen, I think you're trolling.
Yeah.
But and then Vulcan. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess it was Vulcan, or I get it wouldn't. Zazel was good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it would ever be Zazel. I don't think it would be Smoothie. Smoothie wasn't there long enough. Like clearly for mine, I value longevity, or else Sneaky wouldn't have been on it, right? So I don't think that you can really say Smoothie either. Same thing with Bunny Fufu. The only guy is Lemonation, possibly, right? And I just think that the domination that we saw out of Vulcan in the support role was a little bit greater than that of Lemonation.
I mean, I don't have the rosters in front of me, but it feels like support was actually the role that had the most turnover in Cloud9. Because I mean, I'm thinking.
Sneaky was there forever. Jensen was there forever. Blabber been there for quite some time.
I mean, they've only had in their entire history, they've only had 4 ADCs. Sneaky, Sven, only three. No, three then. Sneaky, Sven, and Berserker.
I
There
think
any
I
other
got one
ones?
though.
Well, I mean, subs don't count. Like
Come on.
players who if players who didn't play like a full split, they don't really count.
Who subbed in for Sneaky? Was it Keith?
Yeah, it was Keith, and then they
That's what
played. They also
I
played
was gonna
Golden
say. Keith.
Glue. They played Golden Glue slash Jensen bot lane a little bit as well.
Really?
Yeah,
I
they
don't even
did.
remember
That
that.
that was when like Mage's bot lane was a thing, and they were running. That was when like Fnatic was also running like Soaz bot or shit like that. Whippo bot.
Anyway, so and then obviously Blabber now has his fourth title, which he is getting up there. And so I think the good way to end on this conversation would be, how close is Blabber getting to GOAT conversation? I don't think anyone's going to put him above Doublelift or Bjergsen, but how far behind is he, would you say?
I mean, I think he's probably at the minimum 2 titles away because I think hitting the 6 title mark is kind of the barrier to entry because Bjerg
See,
has 6.
I don't like the title stuff though, because a lot of it is like who you're playing with. Like if he won, so let me just ask you this: if he had 4 titles, but then he won like 4 more MVPs, but didn't win titles, would you still be able to put him up there?
I mean,
I would personally.
the second point that I was about to get to, which also matters a lot, I feel like in the eyes of best NA jungler of all time, is
Mhm.
international performance. Because
Okay.
McSmithy, while the teams that he was on necessarily didn't have insane international results, despite the MSI finals that he got to 2 times in 2016 and 2019. He's just been solid throughout his entire international career, Xmithy that is, and Blabber has been, sort of up and down at some tournaments. Obviously 2018 Worlds, not very good. Ended up getting benched for Sven Skaren. 2019 Worlds, played 3 other games, not too much, but obviously didn't have a great MSI in 2021. Didn't necessarily have the best Worlds last year. So I think a big international performance is probably what Blabber needs to push up there if we're not talking about titles. So
Okay.
I would say you get to 6, you're in the conversation no matter what. And I guess what I mean by in the conversation is it's either Bjerg, Doublelift, Blabber, or Xmithy. Like those are your only options. So, but
Pure
if it's
double
not if
blabber
it's not
double.
titles, yes, you need to win more MVPs, have strong international performances. Because if he's not winning, domestic titles, surely he's going to Worlds as second, third, fourth seed, whatever it might be.
Yeah, see, and I think some people might have, I might think that I have some recency bias, and if you think that, that's totally fine. I actually do put Blabber as the best jungler that North America has had. I think that we've seen dominance from him continuously, just nonstop. since he's joined the league. And while I will admit that Xmithy might have had more longevity because he was in the league since like season 3, I think the high highs that we've seen out of Blabber were a little bit higher than Xmithy's. And so I think there's already some what's the word? Some parity there, perhaps. And I would actually give Blabber the edge. I wouldn't be like, if people said they still thought Xmithy was the best jungler in North America, I wouldn't be like, no, you're wrong. But me personally, I think I'm ready to put Blabber over Xmithy.
He's right there for me. I mean, he's one more title, one more MVP, one more good international tournament away from me, basically. And he's
Interesting.
not even that far behind from all-time GOAT conversation, should he stay on this same trajectory.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, we also have another series to talk about this weekend. Before we do, want to remind people to subscribe if they're enjoying the content, hit the like button, and of course, leave a comment. The comments help us a lot. The like button helps us a lot. And of course, subscribing helps us a lot. Next week, so actually, I do want to say that this episode, we are not going to be covering the CLG stuff because it happened like right after we came out with an episode last week. Don't worry, guys. We will cover the CLG stuff. We're going to say that for next week, just because next week we're going to have an episode more surrounding esports in general, but also just the health of the LCS. Going to kind of revisit the whole split of the LCS and kind of see like where this one ranks amongst others, kind of the health of the league, where we think things should go forward with the LCS. So I just want to remind you guys that we're not ignoring the CLG stuff, but we will talk about it next week. And that episode should be at normal time, right, Jinter? On Sunday nights, 7 o'clock.
Should be, yep.
7 East Coast, 4 o'clock West Coast, and so we'll talk more about that, and we'll have a hopefully a discussion just around the LCS and maybe a little bit of revisiting some of the discussion that was happening before this split, and see if our opinions have changed and whatnot. So we will do that next week. Now, before Golden Guardians went on to face Cloud9 in the finals, we had very high opinions of them when facing against FlyQuest just yesterday. Where should we start with this series, Jinter?
I mean, we were hyping River up a little bit right as we were ending the finals discussion and his performance against Cloud9, but the series against Golden Guardians versus, I guess, the Golden Guardians versus FlyQuest series was the River show.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, honestly, there's quite a few people that you could point to. I think Licorice got player of the series. Um,
He did, yeah.
I again, man, this show makes us sound like a Licorice hater, or at least me, anyways. I didn't think his series was that good, but again, you have to give credit to Licorice for being able to do stuff with counter picks. Like, I cannot say this enough. How night and day his regular split was versus the Licorice that we're seeing now. And while I could definitely give criticism to FlyQuest for not utilizing counter picks and just giving him whatever counter picks he want, you have to give credit to Licorice for punishing really hard, especially the Fiora game. That is the best performance we've seen out of Licorice, maybe his whole career, but definitely since he left C9. That was so good to see. And even though I agree with you that I think it was the River show, I think River was definitely pogging in that series. We do have to look at Licorice and again say just how crazy the turnaround was of his season from regular split to playoffs.
Yeah, with sort of the blue side dominance that we've seen across seems like the whole world, Golden Guardians actually have been getting like a really high win percentage on red side in the playoffs specifically, and a lot of that has to do with the counter picks of Licorice that you mentioned. FlyQuest really was, not wanting to. They were just giving all the initiative to FlyQuest on the top side of the map, and were more going after, stronger mid jungles. I mean, obviously didn't turn out that way because they really got rolled into mid jungle. But in terms of the drafting, FlyQuest was really trying to prioritize the strong mid jungle and just kind of sacrificing top side. And maybe we're underestimating Licorice a little bit because while Impact, as I've mentioned many, many times on the show, he is the neutralizer. He's been struggling in his last two series against some of these, carry versus tank matchups.
Yeah, and we said like, oh, he got gapped by Fudge, when they played Cloud9, and we were like, that kind of makes sense. That's a different animal. But when it comes to Licorice, no offense to Licorice, I would fully expect Impact to be able to neutralize any of the matchups. And I believe FlyQuest probably thought the same thing. And Licorice and Golden Guardians just proved them wrong. And okay, this is kind of revisiting a topic that we've had for a long time in North America, and it's about counter picks in the top lane. But J&T, at what point is the LCS or our LCS teams going to learn counter pick is actually important? if not after this series, after the Golden Guardians FlyQuest series, I don't know anymore. Like, I just think there's some teams that are just never going to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a couple weeks ago talking about, where has the Jackson Fiora gone with all this, tank top stuff? And it has felt like Fudge and Licorice this playoffs have really been the only two players who are willing to bring out those high variance, highly volatile counter picks and, asking for the pressure to be put on them and more often than not coming out better on the other side. So, like you said at the beginning, we really got to credit Licorice here for this massive turnaround that he's made in the playoffs, basically betting on himself with a lot of these carry picks and performances because I think it'd be completely different if, because we look at the Licorice that we had in the regular season, even when Golden Guardians was going on that big win streak, it was mostly facilitative. He was playing a shit ton of Renekton, just being that facilitator, allowing River and Stixay to do whatever they want in team fights, but it's been the complete opposite in the playoffs, it feels like. And, he bet on himself and he's going to MSI because of it.
Yeah. Uh, Pretty crazy stuff. I think we should also talk about the whole Ayla and Winsome stuff. I don't think it came as a huge surprise that Winsome was being subbed in. We kind of talked about it last week. It was like every week it just got progressively worse. Like it was like, they don't need to take out Ayla. Oh, Ayla's looking a little bit worse, but like I could see them going either way. And then after last week, we were like, from what we're seeing, they should probably put Winsome in the game and take out Ayla. And then of course they made that announcement. Um, I guess what were your overall thoughts on the Winsome swap? Because to
Yeah, I
me, I
mean,
thought he looked way better, honestly, even though it didn't really matter that much.
yeah, even though it didn't end up, FlyQuest didn't end up getting the victory, it still did feel like Winsome is the better option over Ayla, although we don't know necessarily from the outside how long Winsome or even if he's still been with the team since getting subbed out.
Hmm.
I presume, well, not presume. I have seen that he's been playing, for FlyQuest Challengers. So when the Challenger League was going on, he was playing those matches. But after that, I'm going to assume that he was working with the LCS team and probably still had some ins with what was going on with scrims and whatnot. So I wasn't necessarily expecting some like monster performance out of Winsome because he's getting subbed in, but he still looked better than Ayla and should probably be taking a hard look at the support position going into next split in terms of who they want to start.
Yeah, I'm not sure if FlyQuest knows, honestly.
No, I think they'll probably just scrim with both of them, and if Ayla improves, then maybe he gets the spot back, or if Winsome just keeps outperforming him, I would expect Winsome to be the starting support come summer.
Yeah, and we saw quite a bit of the Rakan coming from Ayla. That was one of the champions that I think he played the most. And honestly, when Winsome went on the Rakan, it just looked better. So it was like if one of their main picks for Ayla is being outperformed on by the other support, it kind of seems like the swap makes a lot of sense. And quite honestly, it is too early to tell for summer. And yes, we just said that they're probably going to uh do maybe some sort of tryouts or whatever as summer approaches. But to me, I would say right now, I think Winsome's got the upper hand and is more likely to be the starter.
For sure.
Yeah. On the other side of things, back to Golden Guardians, because this is where they really started to like we weren't really sure what to expect after they 3-0'd EG. We were like, should we really expect Golden? Like trying to predict this series was impossible. And I think one of the main guys you got to point to again is who he picks everything. By the way,
His
in
J-Force
this
support was
series,
slapping.
yeah, I wrote it down somewhere. Hold on. He picked Leona, then Jarvan, Heimerdinger, Rakan, and Nami, and looked pretty good on almost all of them. I think maybe the Heimer game he was a little bit less impactful, but in all that said, like this guy knows how to engage a fight. Whether it is the Leona, the Jarvan, as you mentioned, or the Rakan, like this guy is an absolute monster, and it is so wild that honestly, I feel a little stupid for underestimating Golden Guardians. I know the meme right now is like everyone, the Golden Guardians is saying "fuck you" to everyone for doubting them, but I think they kind of have a point. The more I think about it, because when has who he been a bad support in the LCS, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely it's slightly understandable why people were sleeping on Golden Guardians, especially since how they ended the regular season. When you lose the last 4 games of the split, and drop from what was it, third place to sixth place or fourth place to sixth place, something like that, right before the playoffs start, doesn't give you the biggest, vote of confidence, but you know, they sort of seem to get back to their old ways with the addition of a surging Licorice, and this team looked like over the course of the entire playoffs, like the second best team in the league.
And what's kind of interesting is they almost lost this series 3-1. Like to me, it was one of those series that even though FlyQuest was winning and should have closed out the series 3-1 in game 4, to me it didn't feel like FlyQuest was necessarily the better team. Like it was one of those 3-2s that I didn't feel was necessarily all that close. I still don't really know exactly how FlyQuest were picking up these wins, but I have to give credit to Golden Guardians in game 4 for not holding back and going for that Baron. I said, as soon as they stole that Baron, I said to Andrew, I said, Andrew, if Golden Guardians wins this game, we are going to have to remember this Baron sneak because that is the kind of shot calling that, well, it's make or break, right? Like that is the deal breaker there. You do not win this series unless you have someone that says, guys, we need to make something happen. Let's go for it. You need to take a risk. They did, and that risk paid off. And they did something similar not long ago. Was it in the Hundred Thieves series that they did that?
Yeah, they also
Like
just did the same thing. Just
that's such a weapon to be able to know when to do that. And I don't think you see that in a lot of other LCS teams. So lots of props, not just for individual performances, but for the macro calls.
I mean, especially when you run these comps or you have double E to carry, fast Baron is an option that you should always have present in your mind. And as you mentioned, credit to Golden Guardians for recognizing that once that third Drake was spawning and they saw all of FlyQuest running, to mid to hit the mid wave and then run to drag, just turned around and was like, we can just do the Baron right now. Like we have double ADC, like Kraken Slayer, Navori Quick Blades. Like this thing is gonna die instantly. And they took it. They were managed to stall out the game and get the right team fight. At that drag fight where Licorice got that huge ultimate after Vikla whiffed his own. Oh my god, Vikla whiffing that Malphite ult was like so confusing. He solo ulted the one guy who doesn't get hit by the ult. Like made no sense. But Golden Guardians correctly turned. Licorice got that big ult and they just ended from there. And a game that they were on track to lose. Almost the entire time.
Yeah, and then there's the big play where Gory gets the shutdown onto Prince. Now, I don't know like how to say this without sounding like I'm biased towards Prince, but like I expect any other 80 carry in the league to go for that play. Like to just erase Stixay, and he did. But then Gory just made a huge play on the Tristana to get 1,000 gold shutdown and then cleaned up Winsome as well on the Nami. To me, I don't know about you, J&T. Was that a new play out of Prince? Because to me, I was like,
No,
I totally see why anyone would go for that.
I
Of
thought it
course they
was a
would.
good play followed by another good play. Like that's all
Yeah,
that was.
yeah. It is so wild. I guess the instincts that Golden Guardians has. Because even I know we just talked about them sneaking that Baron, but even that Baron that they did sneak was like immediately after a team fight. Like a lot of times a Baron sneak will happen where you see guys like, oh, we see them all bot side or something like that, or we see them all over by drag. But this was like there was a team fight that literally had just happened. And by the time the team fight was done, they were already running towards the Baron. Like it was so quick. So like I know we talked about that Baron call, but I need to emphasize just how crazy and quick of a call that is. Yeah. Anyways, really really impressed from the macro side of Golden Guardians. Pretty impressed.
Yeah, it felt like in the series against FlyQuest, all of their players were outperforming their counterpart for the most part. I think in the maybe I don't know. It did feel like Golden Guardians was just better than them. I don't know. Despite it being
Yeah.
the 3-2, it just felt like Golden Guardians was better.
Yeah, and in every role, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yet somehow it was a 3-2 and it was almost a 3-1 in favor of Fly. I don't know how that happened, but it did. And unfortunately, obviously, we know what happened once Golden Guardians made it to the finals, so we won't go over that again. But
It just felt like
definitely,
Golden Guardians rose to the occasion, and in the big moments, they
yes.
stepped up and they took it from FlyQuest. FlyQuest for the most part had the lead, but it wasn't like they had a massive lead. It was just FlyQuest were the ones leading the dance, and Golden Guardians just took control when it mattered most. And sometimes that's all you need to win a series. It doesn't have to be some sort of dominance in the early game from one side or the other. It's just if you're in it with the right comp and you find the right fight, that's all you need.
And I guess just to put a stamp on the end of this conversation, I guess just one question for each team because we saw them go in completely different trajectories. So I guess I would first want to ask for Golden Guardians, what changed to make them all of a sudden turn it on in playoffs? And then from the side of FlyQuest, what changed for them to just have an absolute downfall? Like what led to their downfall? And I don't know which one you want to start with. We could start with either one, but
Well, I mean, starting with Golden Guardians, it did feel like they just decided to take a more aggressive approach eh, from their picks on a game to game basis. Like we said, from the regular season to playoffs, they really turned Licorice into a counter picking, brawler as opposed to a tank facilitator. And similar in the jungle, they put River back on the early days of why River was succeeding in the LCS on the Dignitas days on those early game champions that can make a huge impact, like Jarvan. Jarvan being the main one, especially in that game 5. And, he just worked really well with Gory. It was,
I wonder how much of the change from Golden Guardians. First of all, I agree, by the way. I wonder how much the change of Golden Guardians going so early game focused had to do with, guys, we're going into a finals weekend against Cloud9. If we don't contest them in the early game, we're going to get run over, so we have to change our play style. Or if it was just naturally what they wanted to do anyways. I wonder that, right? That's probably something that we'll never get the answer to. But if that was their conclusion, I think that's totally a fair reason to be like, guys, we can't be playing the way we've been playing. We have to do something. We can't let Fudge just counterpick our top. We have to be able to counterpick top. And maybe that's why we saw them rise, is because they're starting to play the game the way it should be played.
yeah. And, they I mean, at the same time, they just could be emulating Cloud9 strategy. If they view the way that Cloud9 plays the game to be the best version of it, and they're going to adopt that, and if they can play it well, then that's what they should be doing. I know for the most part, the idea of just copying what works best is an idea that people have started to stray away from, and it's play what you're good at or play your own style. But maybe this is just the Golden Guardian style. It's
This is what they're good at.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Licorice
Because
used to be known as a dominant carry player during his time on Cloud9 and really got away from that when he went to FlyQuest and in the early portions of his days on Golden Guardians. And when he was put on those carry positions, was normally failing, but he's caught a second wind, it seems.
yeah, yeah, pretty wild. And then on the flip side, FlyQuest, the downfall. I guess I have to first point to Prince not being what he was. And look, in all fairness, when you play with two separate supports, I don't expect the best of results by the end of the split, right? Other AD carries are playing with the same support throughout the whole split and they're building up synergy, whereas mid split you have to swap supports. I do want to be fair to Prince and recognize that, but I think it's also important to point out that Prince playoff was not the same at all as spring split regular season Prince. Now that doesn't mean I think all the blame should be laid at his feet, but that's just one of the obvious places that we need to point that was different because he was an MVP candidate. I have to remind people.
Yeah, it sort of then begs the question, did the changing of support from Winsome to Ayla affect his performance because he had to build up synergy with a completely new support? And then by the end of it, when the finals weekend came around and they eventually went back to Winsome, this is a guy you now haven't played with for 2 months. And that synergy that you built up over the first month of LCS just isn't there anymore. So yes, Prince, his performances from the beginning of the regular season to now were non-existent in terms of his impact on the game, but how much that plays into the bot lane dynamic with the support being a bit of a question mark for the most part of the season.
Yeah, and I guess another area to point to, I mean, there's a few more to be quite honest. The first one is Vikla being just not reliable. Let's be honest about it. There was times where he was popping off on the Vagar against what was that, 100 Thieves, and then everything after that, he looked quite bad. My God, the Tristana from just a couple of weeks ago was awful. Like it got to the point where you couldn't really trust your mid laner anymore. Um, then there's Impact not doing what we all expect out of Impact, which is again the neutralizing thing. Like there's so many different areas to point to when it comes to FlyQuest and what led to the downfall that that kind of has me a little bit worried for them going into summer.
Yeah, it does feel like FlyQuest is going into the offseason with a lot of questions in terms of how they want to play the game and who is even going to be playing for them with support.
And I guess the last thing that I'll add, the last, and I think this is the most important thing to point to that led to their downfall is they didn't have solid early games pretty much the whole split. We mentioned so many times on this podcast that they relied heavily on just cruising through the early game and then team fighting to win later or in mid and late game, and they never really adapted their early game. And then they ran into, well, C9 last week, early game team, Golden Guardians this week, early game team. Not surprised that that's probably what led to their downfall, in my opinion, was that they just fell way too far behind in early games, and that just cost them.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if we go back to that series against 100 Thieves that, they did end up winning 3-2, but I wonder if that was maybe an early kind of image of what was to come because 100 Thieves were the worst early game team in the league and they couldn't even really generate early game leads against them and ended up having to go toe to toe in a team fighting series against 100 Thieves and they did come out with the victory, but when you can't generate, big early game gold leads against the worst early game team in the league, it's going to
Were they the
be
absolute worst, like even worse than Immortals and
I
Dig,
mean, I would
or
have
one of the
to
worst?
I would have to assume based on like the 14-15 minute mark metric, but maybe not.
One of the worst at the very least,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Well, at the okay, maybe I don't have the stats in front of me. It felt like that. Maybe Immortals or Dignitas was probably worse, but at least in terms of all the playoffs teams, 100 Thieves are the worst early game by far.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And yeah, so you're saying that we kind of should have had the sign from that series that, hey, maybe things aren't exactly so good in the early
Maybe,
game for
but
FlyQuest, and then they're going to have to go up against. We knew Cloud9 at the time. We didn't know Golden Guardians yet, but clearly that was the area that they were the weakest, was the early game. And I guess the last thing to close out with FlyQuest is the obituary that we do. It is time to put them to rest. They are not going to MSI. They looked in the early parts of the split, they looked like they were a shoe in to go to MSI, and they fell short. I guess J&T, from a rank of 1 to 10, how happy or not happy is FlyQuest? 10 being happy, 1 being devastated.
I'm at like a 4, and I think that doesn't sound that bad, despite the result being pretty bad in terms of how steep they dropped off after week 5, basically. But you know, don't get it twisted. They were probably the third best team in the league. Yes, they fell short against Golden Guardians. It was a 3-2, but they didn't necessarily look like a fantastic team. But I think they're still going into the summer split with, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're still in a fine spot. I think they have a lot less questions than they do compared to a lot of other teams who may be in a similar position to them, like EG and 100 Thieves, for example. We'll get to 100 Thieves in a little bit. But I think they're not that bad. It's all right.
I'll give them the 4 as well, just because they did make finals weekend. That's a plus. Coming into the split, you don't really know exactly. Like, I know there was a lot of people that had hype for this roster, but you don't really know how any roster of a bunch of new players is going to mesh. And so when you consider that they made finals weekend, that is a plus. I just think it's really hard to give them 5 or more when the whole season just felt like it just got worse and worse and worse as time went on. And honestly, if you ask me right now, going into summer, there's a good chance that they're not going to Worlds, because I still think EG has plenty of room to grow. And Golden Guardians, I mean, I don't know, maybe I should buy or sell. I don't know whether I should buy or sell the Golden Guardians stock, but as of right now, Golden Guardians clearly looks better to me. So I think this roster coming into this year, before we see any games in the LCS split, I think they want to go to Worlds, and I'm not really sure if I expect them to go to Worlds at the moment. I think I maybe I just have way too much blind faith in EG. I don't know.
Maybe because I mean,
But would
despite
okay, let's say this. Would we be surprised if EG bounced back, right? Would we?
no, but I also wouldn't be surprised at all if FlyQuest goes to Worlds as well. And
Or if Golden Guardians falls off, right?
yeah,
Because we saw Licorice have a pretty bad split, even though it had a good playoff, pretty bad split. So there's a lot that could happen, but I guess the point that I'm getting across is this team wants to go to Worlds, and I don't think it's clear that that's going to happen.
yeah, I would also agree with that. But even how they ended the split, you know, wasn't even as bad as a team like EG, whom I think we gave twos and threes to. So that's
Yeah,
kind of why I'm
but
at the
that was
4.
also yeah, that was also because they didn't make the finals weekend, and we
Yeah,
thought EG should have been number 1 and blah 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 blah. But yeah. Yeah, no, definitely not a good score as far as what they were looking for, I'm sure. But yeah, I agree with you in saying that it could be worse. They still made finals weekend, and they got knocked out 3-2.
yeah.
It's not all doom and gloom, and they got time to fix some of their issues, even if there are many of them. Next up, JT, we got to talk about Bjergsen. I don't even know what to say.
Yeah,
This to me, I don't know about you, but this to me was way more devastating than the CLG or TSM news. And I know a lot of people will probably disagree with that. But to me, TSM saying that they're going to sell their spot. They haven't really been a team that's trying for a couple of years now. They don't really do much. CLG definitely started to look like an org that cared in the last couple of years. Don't get me wrong, but there was a whole like 5 year window where it was just like whatever. But Bjergsen to me is still like the face, or I mean, it's him and Double Lift, so it's one of the faces of the whole brand of the LCS. And to me, it feels real this time because last time we knew that he was going to coaching, and I even remember him saying that like I don't know if I would call it a retirement because I'm still going to be around and I'm still going to be focused on the game. I'm still going to be with TSM. This to me is like him stepping away from the game completely could be a little bit scary that we never get him back.
Yeah,
And I think that's probably likely.
this one definitely felt official. Obviously, not in only the language and the emotion of the announcement, but just what he said basically that he was officially stepping away from league as a whole, not just competitive play. Because I feel like in a lot of the retirements that we've seen lately, or have been worded as stepping away from competitive play, but Bjergsen basically said that he's walking away from league completely. So I don't expect him to play again in the LCS. I don't expect him to do any coaching for an LCS team. And, hopefully he stays around in some form, whether that's streaming league or maybe he's a guest on the LCS broadcast any given week. But in terms of Bjergsen in the LCS, it's probably done. And yes, that's a sad thing, but I think I was about
It's
to
such
start.
a
I was about to start flaming Bjergsen, but I was gonna say something along the lines of like he's not at that level anymore. But I mean, he's not on the Bjergsen level anymore. But
no. Let's be clear. He's no longer like goat Bjergsen level, but he's still more than capable of playing in this league. And I guess that's where it's just kind of sad. Is like I don't blame him at all for stepping away when he knows he doesn't got the drive anymore. I don't blame him for stepping away at all. It's just a little sad when you know he could still play in the league and you know so many fans care about it. And then it's also around the same time that we learned that CLG's no longer going to be in the league, TSM looking like soon they're going to be leaving. It's just like all these things compiled together. It just kind of hurts, you know?
it's funny all of the like photos and videos that the LCS and even I think Bjerg himself in that video posted, like none of his 1 year stint on Team Liquid was shown at all. I tried to pay attention and just to see like I don't think I've seen a single image or shot of him in a TL jersey in any of the stuff that people are posting on Twitter. So I thought that was kind
In
of
the thing
interesting.
that in the thing he released there was, I'm like
Oh, did
positive
he?
I saw.
I mean, there was
Yeah, in
there
the
was a
thing
bunch
that
of
he
stuff that
released.
the LCS put out that didn't include his time on TL, but it's funny.
Gotcha.
I only mentioned that because I remember, I think it was at near the start of the season, or at least when it was announced that Bjerg was playing for 100 Thieves. I was like, yeah, that 1 year on Team Liquid, like that's getting erased from memory. So I found it pretty funny that there was very little mention of him being on Team Liquid during that whole, that one day of him retiring or
Well,
the
I mean,
announcement when it came out.
the thing is he has so many accomplishments on TSM that it's like I'm not really all that surprised that most of it wasn't focused on TL, right? The guy literally played on TSM for what, like a decade almost? So, yeah, I'm not really all that surprised by that, I guess. One of the important questions, and someone brought it up in the chat a second ago. Oh yeah, Rain in the live chat says, "Is Doublelift staying if Bjerg is retiring?" Which was one of the questions that went through my head. Now, I have no reason to believe at this moment that Doublelift is stepping away. I do believe that Doublelift wants to compete. He said in multiple interviews that like he really enjoys competing and like he feels like even though he enjoyed like co-streaming, for example, it never scratched the itch of competing. Now, with that said, people will say things in like content and hype videos and stuff like that when the season starts. So I don't want to discount that. But to me, I do think it's authentic and I do think he'll be sticking around. But in all honesty, I can't say for sure.
I think to me, just the general vibe that I've gotten from Doublelift this year, and whether it's his own YouTube videos or it's him doing his co-streams in the playoffs or he's doing post-game interviews talking about his team, it feels like he really is enjoying being back and competing and really enjoying the team that he's on in 100 Thieves. Yeah, it probably sucks that Bjerg's not going to be there anymore, and Doublelift's been pretty outspoken throughout his whole career that Bjerg has been his favorite teammate to play with. But I would say just based on how Doublelift has been looking, not only, just when he's on the broadcast or when he's streaming and his performance, all signs point to him continuing to play at the very least the rest of the split. And I would assume maybe a year or two after this as well.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's nothing that we can say for sure. I'm just saying if I had to guess, I'm saying he's sticking around, but
Yeah, me
who
too.
knows? We've been wrong before. God, that would be another big punch to the gut. Lose TSM, CLG, Bjergsen, and Doublelift all within the span of like a month, or not even a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I
That would
mean,
be
the only
that would be
s
something
the
else.
only scenario that I could see where he would, up and retire again, whether or not that's, during summer, after Worlds next year, is if the 100 Thieves project is just a complete flop and they, bomb next split and don't make Worlds, which there's a chance they might not make Worlds just based on some of the other teams that are performing better than them right now, but they're going to be in it, and I expect them to be one of the teams who are fighting for a world spot. And when Doublelift is hungry and performing at his best, those Doublelift teams usually perform pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Rain again ahead of us once again with the last part that we wanted to talk about is who's 100 Thieves mid laner going to be now, right?
I
Because
have
that's
no
obviously
idea.
that's obviously a really important question for 100 Thieves. I think they started to look better as the split went on. Yes, they stumbled at the end in playoffs, of course, but they were on a quite the slide, and then they started to look a little bit more like themselves. I felt like they were starting to look better, and it was like I can't wait to see what this roster looks like in summer. The roster isn't going to be the same though.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at North American options, you look at LCS teams and potential mid laners that 100 Thieves could buy out. Um, Jensen is a potential idea. He didn't necessarily have the best year or best split on Dignitas, but I think everybody recognizes that he was kind of set up to fail to begin with, considering the circumstances outside of Dig's control with their roster going into the season. Another one is Maple. I know we're planning on
Yeah.
mentioning it later anyway, but he is no longer contracted with TSM. We did find out last week that there was going to be some changes, presumably to the TSM roster, with their players likely taking a pay cut. So that's not the case. So Maple is an option. Um, no other ones that I can think of from the LCS side of things. There are a couple like NACL mid laners that people have mentioned, although if I was 100 Thieves, I wouldn't really go that route because they already have two rookies, and adding a third one probably isn't going to make that transition any easier. But
What about Nuke Duck?
yeah, maybe. I mean,
He's coaching
did
them right
he
now. I
did
don't
he
know.
play last year though? Was he also coaching last year, or was he playing last year?
No, he was playing last year.
The only uh Challenger League guy that I was going to mention is Diplex, and only because he has LCS experience and he did play for a top team in Cloud9, so he would be a person who I presume would be able to transition pretty easily into starting spot on an LCS team. But that guy's got maybe some potential. He definitely wasn't bad when he was playing with Cloud9. I think Cloud9 just realized that they could probably get something better with MNS, and Diplex could be a diamond in the rough, maybe.
And they do have an import slot.
Yeah,
So,
it is important to note that 100 Thieves, they do have an open import spot because Closer is the only import on that team.
yeah, there's probably some names that we haven't considered yet, but I'm sure we'll be hearing that news somewhat soon because summer isn't that far away. Summer starts relatively soon. 100 T Demonte in the live chat.
Maybe.
Uh,
Might need a job because he's coaching or was coaching CLG.
no, they kept CLG kept all the staff or whatever. They kept
It,
the whole
they
League of
kept the whole
Legends
league
thing.
staff?
Yeah, they kept all of the League of Legends. What did they call it? They
That's
used
true.
a weird word. I don't remember, but yeah, it's just all they're all going to be under NRG.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah.
good for them
No,
then.
it should be exciting to find out who that's going to be, but yeah, vertical is the word that they were using. Yes, that was the word. Anyways, yeah, so Rip Bjergsen from the LCS. Hopefully he sticks around in some capacity, but it sounds like he kind of wants to take a break from the game, so
Yeah.
personally, I'm pretty sad to see it happen, but I think I'm not alone and that's pretty obvious. What's next, JNT 250?
Well, there was a tweet that IWDominate put out earlier in the week that got
Ah,
some
yes.
people riled up across
Yeah,
Twitter and Reddit. And the question was, or I guess, do you have the tweet in front of you?
I got the tweet. I can read it.
So take it away.
He says, yeah, so I will dominate tweeted hot take. The best player in the world will never be a support player. If we do a draft tomorrow, I can pick from every player in the league. I'm first picking Viper. Support is so much easier to play than mid slash ADC at a pro level. The best mid slash ADC will be greater than the best support as a player. Now, I'm just going to come off the bat and say I totally disagree. But mostly just because of the first sentence, which is the best player in the world will never be a support player. I mean, right now I do think the consensus best player in the world is Carrier. And I
Has
know
been
dominate
for
in
maybe a year now.
and I know in like some of the replies later, I will dominate says that himself. So he does acknowledge that like everybody else says that it's Carrier. I just me personally, I cannot see how it's not Carrier at the moment.
I
But I'll
think
acknowledge that I don't watch a lot of LPL. So I'll acknowledge that.
Well, it's important to note that, and you kind of said it right at the beginning, before or just after you read the tweet out, that his first point, his first sentence, and his second sentence are two completely different points. And
Yes, they are different takes.
I think that's where a lot of the controversy lies, because I mean, just read the first point out again. It was just that support will never be the best. Just read the first sentence again. So you have the exact words.
The first sentence is the best player in the world will never be a support player. And it's like
So
instantly like
right off,
wrong.
yeah,
'Cause it
exactly.
is.
Right off the bat, that is basically false, because I don't know about everybody else, but feels like the community, for the most part, has agreed unanimously that Carey has been the best player since last year's MSI, basically.
I think I might have even said this on this show before, but I'll say it again. When I was watching Carrier's Thresh, I couldn't stop thinking that this guy might be scripting. The only reason I know he's not scripting is because he's playing on one of the league's PCs. But I was like, is there a way this guy's scripting? Like these hooks are way too damn good, and I'm not even kidding. By the way, people will think that I'm exaggerating. I'm not kidding. The thought of like scripting went through my head. I'm like, these hooks look so unnatural, but there's no way that he's cheating. I don't think he's cheating, but like that was actually what went through my head. And so, if you ask me, he's the only support in the world that hard carries as much as he hard carries. Like, I think one of the reasons why, just one of the reasons why Dom will say that mids or ADs are naturally better is because usually those are the guys that you see completely taking over games. But I would argue that carry as support takes over games and hard carries 1v9 as support. So, I mean, I don't care what role you're doing. If you're 1v9 in the game, you're an MVP in my mind if you can do that over and over and over again.
Yeah. And then to get to his second point that he makes, is saying that if you were doing a draft, and what he means by draft is like a traditional sports draft where you're picking from an available pool of players, that you would always pick mid or ADC first. And I think that is a completely fine point, and an argument I actually agree with. I think I would also throw jungle into the equation, because if it was me, I'd probably be taking a jungler first overall.
Canyon, who are you taking?
I mean, not like, if we ignored this year of LCK, it would be Canyon, but Canyon didn't necessarily have the greatest the split so
Hmm.
far. But let's ignore the last 4 months that we've seen of Canyon, because for me, it'd be Canyon. Canyon is my number one overall pick, and would be for the last 3 years now.
See, now I disagree with the second part of his take as well because I am taking Carrier. I think what kind of to the point that he's making that like supports don't really carry that hard is I think Carrier is that much better than the next best support. And I think that's an even better reason to take the support. So I would probably agree with him if it weren't for Carrier not existing, then I would probably look to take a mid, AD, jungle, something else. But I actually think if I had first pick overall world and I could take anyone, I'm definitely taking the best player in the world.
One other wrench that I want to throw into this problem here, maybe something that he assumed or other people aren't taking into consideration, is role swapping players. I know this is going to come a bit out of left field, but one of the takes that LS has been pretty adamant about for like years now is that if he was picking his like all-time league roster, he'd put Faker at support. And
Hmm.
I've always agreed with that, because just the way that, Faker's like pretty cerebral in terms of how he plays the game. He's never really been, apart from his early days of league, he's never been the better mechanical player. Um, I guess I shouldn't say he's never been, because he was, when he was like completely shitting on everybody else. But for the most part, since like season 7 or 8, basically, he's never been, one of the best players in the world mechanically. So if we were also allowed to pick a team and then role swap players, I would also think that you could make a fine argument for a mid laner swapping to support over your traditional supports.
I see. And in all fairness, that is a point that Dom brings up in some of the replies that like there's a lot of people that have role swap to support, but not the other way around. To me, I don't that is kind of irrelevant to me. Like, I don't really care. Like, just because someone role swap to support doesn't mean the role is easy. It just means that the role requires a lot of game knowledge. And usually the guys that role swap to support have been playing the game for a long freaking time. So that to me, I didn't really like the role swap argument. But with all that said, I don't mind his arguments. Everything past the first sentence, I don't mind his arguments. I just don't necessarily agree with them. I do mind the first sentence. The best player in the world will never be a support.
Yeah,
That, like, I just disagree with that straight up. That, but yeah, the rest,
it's
I
scary. Yeah.
think, yeah, in my opinion, it is, and I think a lot of people agree with that as well. But I love Dom throwing out takes like this because I think it's just, I don't know, I think they're fun conversations. Yeah. Anything else on this, Jinter?
Um, I don't know. Kind of agree with like LS has talked about this a bunch, but I kind of agree with him where he would have three mid laners playing on his team if he was drafting a team. He's always said this. He's always said he would have Chovy top, Showmaker
Yeah,
mid, and Faker support. And
interesting. I
I
never
kind
heard
of
him say that.
I kind of agree with him.
That is interesting. I would like to see it. I mean, we won't, but I would love to see it. Anyways, we got MSI coming up. Let's do a quick update, JNT. Let's try to speed run this if we can. But I
Hmm.
know there's probably a lot of people. This is kind of our quick news section. There's probably a lot of people that are out of the loop as to all of the MSI representative updates. So JNT and I thought that we should just give you guys a quick update. Take it away, Jinter.
Yeah, so obviously the LCS just finished as the spring split is concluded. Cloud9, the number one seed, auto advances to the group stage, whereas Golden Guardians, number two seed, goes into the playing stage. Um, EMEA, formerly, I guess, known as EU,
Europe.
because everybody just called it EU, but proper title is EMEA. G2, they've already locked MSI at the very least as the second seed, could bump up to the first seed if they win finals, or I think if they also finish second in the split and anybody but Koi doesn't win, they also go first. So,
Okay.
however, the second spot is still up for grabs for tons of teams except for XL and Heretics because they got eliminated in the regular season.
Yeah,
Uh,
Europe's got quite a bit to go still, right?
yeah.
Okay.
In the LPL, JDG has already locked MSI at the very least the second seed, and the other spot will go to the winner of EDG versus BLG, which is the lower bracket finals. Edward Gaming versus Billy Billy. If people don't know who that is. Uh,
Okay.
Obviously, the LCK finals were very early this morning, which I watched
Spoiler
live late
alert.
last night. Yes, spoiler alert. Genji actually upset T1 3-1. So Genji going to emphasize the first seed. Both LCK representatives are auto qualified into the group stage, so we will not see either of those teams in the playing stage. However, the LPL, their second seed does go through the playing stage. One team will be JDG. I already said that. Ignore PCS, PSG Talon has been dominating that region for the last 4 years now, and they're the number one seed. They're going to MSI. The VCS, they have not even started their playoffs yet, but it's probably going to be Gigabyte Marines. I checked their regular season; they went undefeated, 14-0, and they seem to be way better than the competition. So expect it to be Gigabyte Marines.
Are we sure they're going to make it to the tournament? Because they kind of
Yeah,
have this history of just not doing their playoffs and stuff.
yeah, I've been like shit talking Riot and how they've been handling the VCS for like the last 2-3 years now because they've been missing like almost every single international competition because of COVID restrictions or like their Olympics or their international games, whatever it was back in MSI last year. What's the next team I have? LJL.
LJL.
It's Sengoku versus Detonation Focus Me. Detonation Focus Me, obviously the team out of the LGL that makes it to the international tournament every single time except for once in the history of that team being able to make international tournaments. However, Sengoku Gaming is actually coached by Reapered, former coach of Cloud9, former coach of 100 Thieves, and looks like that team could actually make it. So Detonation Focus might not make it this year. And then
Okay.
last up, we have LLA and the CB LOL who have yet to play their finals. And yeah, so I don't know any
It's
of those
funny
teams, so I'm not even going to
that
talk about them.
Rain in the live chat ahead of us again with the Reaper thing. Even before you said that, Rain, pretty impressed. You are. I don't know. Maybe it's JT on another account. I don't know, but yeah, MSI. I think, guys. I think MSI is going to be much better this year with the new format. And we're not going to go over it all again. Maybe we will in a future episode. Not going to go all over it all again. But I'm just going to say this real quick. If you haven't been the biggest fan of MSI in the past, I am no different from you. Give MSI another chance this year, guys. I think the format should be a lot better. And especially with two teams from every region, it's not so damn doomed if our one representative looks bad. So uh, give it another shot, I would say. I know most of our listeners probably still love MSI, but I'm sure there's some people that are just like, it's not Worlds.
Yeah, and then we got some quick news. Most of it is NA related. First up, I kind of hinted to it a bit earlier. Maple removed from the global contract database on April the 7th, which was 2 days ago. So he will no longer be starting for TSM. Could be possibly playing on a different team next split, whether that's in the LCS or anywhere else in the world. Who knows?
As
But
of
100
a
Thieves.
couple of hours ago, I did check as well to see if there were any other TSM players where their contract was erased from the thing. They're all still on there so far, guys. So as far as we know, the same roster is the same minus Maple for now.
Yeah, they're getting paid minimum salary plus an extra digit because the new TSM LOL general manager made sure to let us all know that they weren't being paid minimum salary, just a little bit more than the minimum.
It's so like for those that missed it, there was like some drama because Travis came out with a video saying that the rumor is that the players are being offered minimum salary, and he came out with a Reddit comment. The GM, rather, the TSM GM came out with a Reddit comment saying that a lot of what Travis was saying was untrue, but then he didn't exactly give the most details. So pretty much everyone in the comment section is a little bit weary or hesitant to believe TSM, which that to me is the funniest part about all of this is TSM gets rid of a bunch of their staff, but nothing changes. Like all of the messaging is bad. It's not very clear. And once again, all the TSM fans and people that aren't TSM fans just don't believe it. It's funny how, like, even though they're changing all the staff, there's still just so much trust that is lost in this organization that has continued to be like either deceitful or kind of hiding the truth. And so that doesn't seem to have changed at all. And it's just kind of funny that the GM comes out and says, no, Travis isn't telling the truth, but it's like not really giving the details as to why exactly.
We always love to talk about on this podcast how god awful TSM is at public relations, and it's just like not even funny. And I would just like, if you don't realize that or be like, what are they even talking about? Look at how TSM versus CLG has been treating the last 2 weeks. We got the news of like CLG being sold, and they were like right on it in terms of like talking about what this means for the team, what this means for the employees, how is this affecting their league team going forward, what's going on here, what's going on there. And CLG did a great job of being openly transparent with the community, letting everybody know what's going on with the league team, with the rest of their employees. It wasn't necessarily the brightest of days because they had to announce that they were getting rid of a lot of their employees. However, keeping people in the loop, open and transparent. However, when it comes to TSM, you have to go to Reddit threads in the comments to find out what's actually going on because this team is just so inept and how to communicate with the LCS and the league media. It's just actually abysmal.
They're so damn consistent, though, Jinter?
Oh, Reddit's where it's at, I guess.
they,
Like,
they, they are consistently awful with their PR. God bless them for bringing that consistency that only TSM could bring to the LCS. And not for much longer, apparently, is the rumors. But we don't know if that's true either because they don't really say much either. Oh, the irony.
yeah. Well,
I
moving
think we'll
along.
learn more. I think
Oh,
we'll learn more about that as time goes on and as there's more leaks. I guess the last thing I'll say is I still want to hear more from Travis's side of things because he said that he had multiple sources. Now, I'm not saying Travis doesn't get things wrong. In full disclosure, I am a fan of Hotline League and Travis Gafford, so understand that yes, this is a biased take, but like, I just because the TSM GM said that it's not true, I'm still not like I have no opinion yet. Because if there's two sources telling Travis the same thing, there's got to be some truth to it, or at least some sort of reason as to why those rumors got out from more than one source. And the other thing that I'll also add is Travis is trying really hard to let TSM have an opportunity to be open with their fans by inviting on the GM to Hotline League. I don't know if that's been accepted yet or not, but it reminds us of last year where Travis had that TSM Dominic guy on Hotline League to try to be open with fans. It's like, it's funny because TSM continuously will like bad talk Travis Gafford. And then he's like, hey guys, I'm just trying to let your fans know what's going on because you won't. I just think that's hilarious.
yeah, it's. I don't even know. I don't even know what to say about TSM and how they present themselves. It's just
But again, I can acknowledge that it's a biased take and a biased opinion because again, I will acknowledge that I am a fan of Travis Gafford. So
I mean,
I
I,
don't know.
I think
It's funny
I
though.
think it's also important to note that in that initial video where he went on to talk about the things that he's been hearing, behind the scenes, he never reported anything as fact or as this is happening, this is exactly what's going on. It was very vague, is not the right term, but nothing was concrete and felt
He
like.
did. He was. He made sure to say I have multiple sources telling me. So
But I, mean,
yeah,
I guess the point that I'm trying to make is nothing was confirmed or nothing was official by any means, and
you're right.
it did feel like this TSM GM guy was kind of like insulted by the way that he was even responding to these Reddit comments, saying like, "This is a fact. TSM has never once offered anybody on the LCS minimum salary. Fact." I don't know what the other fact thing that he
It
wrote was,
felt.
but it felt so goddamn idiot. Like, oh my
It
god, it felt
felt
so
aggro.
petty.
It did. It did. It really felt aggro. And then at the bottom, it was like a journalist. There was like
Oh
the
yeah,
definition
oh
of a.
my god, that was so fucked up. Like,
Oh,
You
I
could
don't know. It's really
you
funny.
could see the anger that he had when he was, like, typing that out.
Yeah. It's so funny because I just know from Travis' side of things, from how much content of his I've watched over the years, I know he's sitting at his PC going, I'm just trying to help this org be communicative with their fans, and they just can't do themselves a favor."
Yeah. They're their own
uh,
worst enemy when it comes to this kind of stuff.
it is funny. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, moving on to Team Liquid, they are parting ways with Marin, their head coach. Um, yeah. I would think that they're probably gonna keep the roster intact.
Really, I thought to me when I looked at this, I thought that that would be a good reason to suggest that they might be making swaps. Now, in all fairness, when a team should be good and they're just not good, the coach is fired regardless. I think they're going to try to make a move if they can with their roster, but I guess that's always the thing to note, right? If they can, like who's available is
Yeah, I
always.
guess my question to them would be if they are going to make a move, who, I mean, presumably, if I was calling the shots at TL, if I was going to change anybody, the guy that I would change would be Harry. And now with Bjergsen retiring, you have a whole nother team who's going to be potentially in a bidding war with you for possible options within the mid lane. And you got to look at it from a free agent's perspective, or not even a free agent, but as a person who's contracted to another team. Would I want to go with 100 Thieves, play with this, ascending team with one of the goats in double lift, or do I go to this all Korean roster where, maybe I might not fit in as well if you're, an NA player, I guess I mean with this, but I
Yeah.
think Team Liquid is not as big of a draw as 100 Thieves is if they want to make a change specifically at the mid lane.
What's so funny about TL possibly making changes is that like from not from TL side of things, but from the fan side of things, there was calls for them to replace calls for them to replace jungle. You got to replace mid. Like there was from the fan side of things, TL fans that wanted all three roles to be replaced, and it's like I don't know if that's gonna happen. That seems like a stretch, but it is. I think it's noteworthy that it could be any one of those roles.
Wait, so you think they could replace top jungle, mid, or AD?
I think all of those players drastically underperformed. That doesn't necessarily mean I think they will be replaced,
I
but
don't think
I
Summit
think it's
drastically underperformed. I wouldn't
see.
put him in that category.
I actually I like that you say that because me personally, if I said like one of those I had to keep, it would actually be Summit because I think a lot of people are going to be like, "What?" I think Summit actually had a good second half, and I think that was totally ignored because of how bad his first half was.
His first 2
So
weeks were really bad, and it definitely left a
awful.
bad taste in people's mouths, but I think they just kind of wrote him off the rest of the way, and he actually was playing pretty well, towards the
I
end of the
so
season.
I actually agree, and I'm just saying people were calling for those players to be replaced.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
for me, I would keep Summit absolutely, but yeah, I don't really know what the hell to do with that roster because it didn't work. It didn't really come close to working. They finished. They didn't even make playoffs. Like, come on.
I'm still
Uh,
committing to the opinion that I think Jan is a good player and will be a good player and should
you know,
be on this Team Liquid roster. He's the guy that I really wouldn't give up on. If I had to make changes, I would make mid first and second maybe jungle. But despite all the mistakes that he was making, I still think for the most part the potential outweighs the risk.
okay, and then next up on our list of quick news, maybe this is fitting with TL. Maybe it's got nothing to do with TL, but Bwipo possibly making a return to pro play. JNT, you want to explain a little further?
Yeah, I wasn't watching. I only saw this clip from a YouTube video, but Bwippo was doing the co-streams with LS for the FlyQuest Golden Guardian series, and he LS kind of pointed out that he was using some language that would hint towards him being on a team or potentially signing for a team. And I think it's important to note that Bwippo didn't confirm or deny anything. Well, I guess I should say he didn't confirm anything. He denied that he was going on a team for summer, but if you watch the clip, I don't know exactly what was said on the clip, but if I would go watch the clip, and the language that he uses does seem to point that he might be joining a team next year or next
Can
split.
we find the clip and put it in the description of the YouTube video? Can
Yeah,
we do that?
I can do that.
I'll try to remind you to do that because it was odd. Like I can't remember the exact words that were used, but it definitely did feel like he wants to make a return. Now, I guess I'll just ask this, Jitter. Do you think that would be a Europe return or so an EMEA or whatever or a NA return?
Well, I would guess NA, and part of the reason why I say that is because Bwippo has said on stream a few times that he did come to NA with the intention of, committing to moving there.
Mhm.
So, and even when he found out, or not that he found out, but he basically said that he wasn't going to be playing for a team in the spring split, he also was of the opinion that he wanted to stay in NA and field NA offers before he just up and went to Europe, because he was a person whose name was being talked about for rosters for winter LEC 2023.
Yeah, so I agree. I actually, if I were to guess, I think it would be NA for a couple of reasons. One, he has said that he likes being in NA and that he has no problems there. I also remember, I don't know if it was a Travis Gafford interview, a Degon or something. There was an interview where like he said that he still wanted to prove himself in North America, like he had done it in Europe, and like to be able to come over to NA and have no success kind of left a bad taste in his mouth, like the job's not done sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there's like the whole if you're not what was the quote? It was like if you're not playing for Fnatic or G2 or whatever, you're not going to Worlds or whatever. I realize that has changed, but the point is I don't see him getting on a top team in Europe. Those spots are probably taken, and I think he wants to be able to go to Worlds. And I think his chances of going to Worlds are probably better in North America than they are in Europe at the moment. So I think there's a few reasons why it might suggest North America, but in all fairness, we are really getting ahead of ourselves because it's possible that he's still not going to be on a team. It
Yeah.
just seems like he will be from a clip.
And one other thing that, I mean, I personally am not buying into this, but other people seem to be, is the fact that Bwipo could also play jungle. Because he did play a split of jungle on Fnatic before he made that move to NA going to Team Liquid, but I'm not buying it at all. I think that was just a one-off in terms of he was still contracted to Fnatic. They obviously had a problem and they were getting rid of Selfmade anyways, and Bwipo just ended up being there, and they thought it was better for him to be on the team to help Adam. So I don't expect jungle to be in the picture whatsoever, whether that's NA or EU.
I'm just going to quickly go through our top laners and you tell me if it's likely they get replaced. Okay, so 100 Thieves Tenacity,
No,
Fudge,
no,
of course not. Dokla,
maybe,
maybe. Armut,
yes. Or,
possibly, yep.
well,
Someday.
Bwipo could replace him, is I guess what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, like we're just talking about what is possible, not even
Mhm.
necessarily likely, but possible. So Dokla, Armut, EG someday,
It's possible.
maybe. FlyQuest, Impact.
I wouldn't, but
I don't think so because of the language stuff. I think you got too many Korean players on that team to take away a Korean speaking player. I think that would be a little bit troll. Licorice, they can't import slot.
yeah,
Revenge, I don't think Immortals is ever going to spend for him.
yeah, no,
Team Liquid,
maybe,
maybe. And then TSM, they have Haunter, but they don't really want to spend, so
yeah,
probably not. So we're looking at CLG, Dig, maybe EG, and that's kind of it.
yeah,
Yeah. I don't even know which one would be more likely. Dig, because did he like playing with
yeah.
Santorin? I'm
Dig
not sure.
maybe. Dig is probably like the only option that makes sense.
Hmm. Would be interesting, anyways. Interesting. What else for quick news, Jinter?
Yeah. The last thing, according to Monte Cristo and his sources, although him and Thorn's sources are something that we should always mention because their sources aren't necessarily they don't have 100% hit rate on them. But he says that the LCS is going to adopt the LEC format next year.
Interesting. I think it's a good thing, although I kind of worry about like it being really difficult to follow the league. You're asking people to commit more time to the league, but you're making some of the games more interesting. I, I find it really interesting because, um, well, there's a couple of things I'm worried about. Viewership has been dropping already. Now you're asking the people that are still interested to invest more time into watching. And one of the big things that I'm really worried for, if this is true, we still don't know if it's true, but if it's true, is North America has visa issues almost every single year. And so what, someone's just going to miss like the whole winter split? I think this format fits Europe a lot better than it does North America. And that doesn't mean it can't fit North America. I just think that there are some issues that might arise from making the swap, even if it might be a good swap overall.
Yeah, and I guess the other question would be you have to switch back to playing 3 days a week. So presumably, with Valorant being in the studios on Saturday, Sundays, that just means we're also watching games on Wednesday. So I don't. I wonder how likely it is for people to tune into the LCS 3 days in the work week.
Yeah, I wonder that as
Two
well.
is pushing it already, and
Yeah, people don't show up to the games live. We've seen the audience many times. There's no one there in the middle of the day because most people are working at that time.
mhm.
But yeah, I guess the good thing is we've been asking for a long time to get like Immortals and Dig out of the league. Well, that's one way to get them out is to knock them out of the of the league early,
Yeah,
right? By not qualifying for, I think they called the group stage the best of threes, whatever it is. But
yeah, that's the group stage.
I guess that's the plus. Is that whatever team sucks because of imports, we don't got to watch them or not. Yeah, because of visa issues, we won't have to watch them for long. I guess.
Yeah, that's
I
even a
don't know.
problem. That's even a problem I didn't even think about that you mentioned the visa issues because
I think it's a huge problem, right? How many splits have we? How many in like January is never good for the LCS. There's always visa issues, right?
yeah,
Whippo, Core JJ, Ayla. I'm sure there's others I'm forgetting,
Ignar,
but those are just the ones that off the top of my head
Armut,
are moot. Yeah.
Ori.
Yep.
I think
So,
that must.
anyways, we'll see if that. I guess just last thing on it, real quick. Do you think they should make the swap though, regardless of those issues?
Um, I don't know. I mean, if the rest of it's unlikely that the LPL and the LCK change their format to match the LEC and the LCS if they were to do it, because they're already playing best of threes. So I would say I would only change the format if the rest of the world is going to adopt it. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think I would right away.
Yeah, I the more I think about it, the more I think no, they shouldn't. But a rumor doesn't necessarily mean that it's happening yet, and I think there's probably a lot more thought
And
that they need to put
considering
into it.
that like the league potentially is worried about a lot of teams exiting, having two of the teams like only appear in 9 games, it's even less games than before. It could even be a problem for those bottom teams. It's like now they're getting even less screen time. So how do you keep those teams happy?
Honestly, I know that I'm not the only one to bring up this idea, and I don't know if it's even possible for them to do. But I think there's a lot of people that just want to see this league go down to 8 teams. And I think that that would actually be healthier for the league. That you're asking way less time commitment for people to commit to the games, and then maybe you would even be able to start the broadcast an hour later, and maybe more people can actually go to the games.
Speaking of the broadcast, can we once again talk about how horrible the LCS is at scheduling stuff, where they have to delay the start of the finals by 30 minutes because they couldn't think to imagine that the LEC was going to, their play was going to run into the LCS start time of the finals? Like, hello? What's going on?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't even know if I think this is true, but I'll just throw it out there because I saw a reply on Twitter. Someone that was at the game said that there might have been some PC issues because Cloud9 was on the stage for a while trying to do something with their PCs.
Oh, so
I
they
don't
were
know
like,
how
it was
true
tech
that.
issues?
We don't know. That's why I'm saying I don't know if that's the truth. I'm just, I guess, benefit of the doubt. But to me, it seemed pretty darn clear that they were waiting for LEC and for CB Law to finish.
Yeah,
But I
CB
don't know.
LOL playoffs were also on. Also important to note.
Yeah.
So like there was probably 300K Twitch viewers that were watching League that wasn't the LCS if they would have started
Yeah.
the first game at the 4 o'clock designated start time.
So Blaze in the live chat says that was why I was at the game and they didn't say anything, and they didn't say anything to the broadcast either. So that's
They
why
just
we don't.
said we're delaying it. Yeah.
Just to be clear, we don't know for sure, Blaze, or anyone listening for that matter. We're just hypothesizing because the communication on this was about as good as TSM's communication to their fans. Boom, roasted.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean,
But that's it for this episode. Is that? Oh, you got more, Janther?
well, I was just gonna say like they could have also just been on stage for the extra time because they knew that they weren't going to start the series because they still had
Yeah.
LEC and CBLOL playoffs to finish. So
Absolutely possible. That is very, very true. But we don't know, and I don't think we're gonna know. I don't know. Maybe somebody will let us know. I'm not sure. Okay, that's it for this episode, guys. Again, we still will have an episode next week. Should be normal time, 7 o'clock East Coast, 4 o'clock West Coast. We'll be live at twitch.tv/Clown Fiesta Podcast. And remember, you can find us on all podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever other ones there are. And of course, we're on YouTube as well. So be sure to find us wherever you search the Clown Fiesta podcast. You should be able to find us. Thanks for you guys hanging out in the live chat. Always quite helpful, honestly. Most of the time, quite helpful, but definitely this episode quite helpful with the information that we were made unaware of. So thanks for helping us out with that. And we'll see you guys next week. This has been episode 121 of the Clown Fiesta podcast.